what really happened to Hitler's family after World War II. When Adolf Hitler died in that Berlin bunker, the world believed the nightmare had finally ended. History closed the book, and silence followed. But far from the ruins of the Third Reich, the consequences did not stop with him. His name survived. His blood survived. And for those who carried it, life became something far darker than history ever recorded. What happened next was hidden from textbooks, buried by shame, fear, and a decision so extreme it still chills historians today. The fall and the name that remained. It was April 1945, and Berlin was burning. The 1,000-year empire that Adolf Hitler had promised collapsed in just 12 years. In a bunker beneath the dying city, the architect of the greatest catastrophe in human history took his own life. And in that moment, one of history's most infamous men vanished into death. But his name did not vanish with him. When we think about the end of World War II, we imagine justice being served with Nazis hunted down and trials held at Nuremberg. But we forget something crucial. Hitler had a family made up of real people who shared his blood. On June 1st, 1960, in a quiet farmhouse in Bavaria, the last person to legally carry the surname Hitler took her final breath. Her name was Paula, and she was Adolf's younger sister. But that was not the end of the story, because it was barely the beginning. Adolf Hitler left no children of his own, but he had siblings and half-siblings, along with nieces and nephews. Every single one of them faced an impossible choice after the war ended. How do you live when your last name is Hitler? Some of them changed their identities completely, while others disappeared into small towns, hoping nobody would find them. A few of them made a pact, which was an unspoken agreement that sent chills down my spine when I first learned about it. They decided to never have children because they chose to let the bloodline die. Nobody forced them to make this decision, but they believed the Hitler name should vanish forever. Think about that for a moment. The man who was obsessed with racial purity and perfect bloodlines left behind no descendants of his own, and the relatives who survived him made sure it stayed that way. To understand what happened to Hitler's family after the war, we need to go back to where it all started, the broken home that created a monster. The Hitler household was not a happy place because it was cold, strict, and filled with fear. Adolf's father, Alois, was a brutal man with a volcanic temper who beat his children regularly. Adolf's mother, Clara, tried to provide some warmth, but she died in 1907 and left her children with scars that would never heal. Only 2 of Adolf's siblings survived into adulthood. His half-sister Angela was born in 1883, and his full sister Paula was born in 1896. Neither of them had any idea that their brother would one day become the most hated man in history. But even as children, the signs were there. Paula later recalled one of her earliest memories when she was just 8 years old, and Adolf struck her across the face. Decades later, she still remembered the sting and said bitterly that she could still feel her brother's loose hand across her face. The violence in that household shaped everyone who grew up in it, and by the time the Third Reich fell in 1945, only Angela and Paula remained. Their connection to Adolf had become a lifelong curse that they would carry to their graves. Alois Jr. Alois Hitler Jr. was Adolf's older half-brother who lived in the shadow of history and died without anyone noticing. Alois Jr. was born in 1882, which was 23 years before Adolf, and the 2 brothers never got along because their childhood was marked by rivalry and resentment. By his 20s, Alois Jr. had become a drifter who wandered Europe while working odd jobs. Eventually, he ended up in London, where he married an Irish woman named Bridget Dowling, and in 1911, they had a son named William Patrick Hitler. But Alois was not built for family life, so he abandoned Bridget and William and returned to Germany alone. By the late 1930s, he was running a small cafe in Berlin called Café Alois, and ironically, it became a hangout for SA stormtroopers who served his half-brother's regime. Adolf never acknowledged him, and in Mein Kampf, he made no mention of Alois Jr. at all. Alois remarried and had another son named Heinz, but he still remained invisible to his famous half-brother. After the war, when Nazi leaders were being hunted, Alois Jr. simply vanished. He changed his surname to Hiller and settled in Hamburg, and on May 20th, 1956, he died of natural causes. His grave went unvisited until nature reclaimed it. Not everyone in the Hitler family stayed loyal because one man turned against Adolf completely, and he did it in the most dramatic way possible. William Patrick Hitler. His name was William Patrick Hitler, and he was born in 1911 in Liverpool, England, as Adolf's nephew through his half-brother Alois Jr. When Adolf rose to power in the 1930s, William saw an opportunity and moved to Germany, hoping the Hitler name would get him a comfortable position in the Nazi regime. He was wrong about that. Adolf despised his nephew's greed and ambition and publicly humiliated William while refusing to help him. The relationship turned toxic fast, and in 1939, William did something unthinkable by giving an explosive interview to Look magazine titled "Why I Hate My Uncle." In that article, William described Adolf as petty, cruel, and unstable, while telling stories of his uncle whipping flowers in fits of rage. The interview was published worldwide, and William had declared war on his own family. That same year, William and his mother fled to America, and once there, he took the ultimate step of defiance by enlisting in the United States Navy to fight against Nazi Germany. Adolf was reportedly furious and called William his loathsome nephew, but William did not care and served honorably as a hospital corpsman until 1945. After the war, William changed his name to Stuart Houston and settled in Patchogue, Long Island, where he married a German-American woman named Phyllis and had 4 sons named Alexander, Louis, Howard, and Brian. They lived quiet lives behind white fences, and most of their neighbors had no idea who they really were. But here is the thing that still haunts me. Not one of those 4 sons ever had children. Howard got married, but he died in a car crash in 1989 without any kids, and the others never married at all. The Stuart Houston line ended silently in suburban New York. Heinz Hitler, while William fought against Adolf, another nephew made the opposite choice. His name was Heinz Hitler, and he was a true believer in the Nazi cause. Heinz was born in 1920 and was the son of Alois Jr. and his second wife Hedwig. Unlike William, Heinz worshipped the Nazi ideology and attended an elite Nazi training school where he was groomed to be a future leader. Some reports say Adolf took special interest in him, perhaps seeing Heinz as the loyal heir William refused to be. Heinz enlisted in the Wehrmacht as a radio operator, and in January 1942, during fighting outside Moscow, his unit was overrun. Heinz was captured and thrown into Butyrka prison, which was one of the most notorious facilities in the Soviet Union. What happened next is unclear, because some say he was tortured, while others say he died of disease. Soviet records list his death as February 21st, 1942, when Heinz Hitler was just 21 years old. He left no children and no widow and no memorial. There was just a name in a prisoner log, and the boy who believed in his uncle's dream died alone and forgotten by the world. Geli Raubal and the niece who died in Hitler's apartment. Of all the tragedies in Hitler's family, none is more disturbing than the death of Geli Raubal. She was Adolf's niece through his half-sister Angela, and many historians believe Adolf was obsessed with her. Geli moved into Hitler's Munich apartment in 1925 when she was just 17 years old, and from that moment, her life was no longer her own. Adolf controlled everything about her existence, including what she wore and who she talked to. He forbade her from dating and pulled her out of university because he wanted her close to him. Visitors noticed how Geli's bright personality slowly faded under Adolf's suffocating control, and whispers spread. Was she just his niece, or was there something darker going on? In September 1931, Geli was found dead in Hitler's apartment with a bullet wound through her chest. The gun that killed her belonged to Adolf, and she was only 23 years old, with the official ruling being suicide. But rumors of foul play followed the case for decades. Some believed Geli had tried to escape Hitler's control, while others whispered that she was pregnant. What we know is that Geli's death shattered Adolf. He locked himself away for days while refusing food, and he kept her portrait until the day he died. Geli left behind no diary and no children and no explanation. There were just unanswered questions and a ghost that haunted Hitler for the rest of his life. Leo Raubal and the nephew who survived Stalingrad. Geli was not the only child of Angela Hitler because she had a brother named Leo Raubal Jr., and his story is one of survival against impossible odds. Leo was born in 1906 and bore a striking resemblance to his infamous uncle with his tall frame and piercing features. Adolf took a particular liking to him and invited Leo to dine at the Berghof while treating him almost like extended household. In October 1939, Leo was drafted into the Luftwaffe's engineering corps and was sent to the Eastern Front, which was one of the bloodiest theaters of the war. In January 1943, during the Battle of Stalingrad, Leo was seriously wounded, and when the German Sixth Army surrendered, Leo was among the prisoners taken. News of his capture reached Adolf quickly, and in an uncharacteristic display of vulnerability, the Führer tried to intervene. He proposed a prisoner exchange and offered to release Stalin's own son in return for Leo. Stalin's response was ice cold when he said that war is war, and there would be no mercy for family. Leo vanished into the nightmare of Soviet captivity and spent 12 years in prison camps, enduring starvation and brutal conditions. It was not until September 1955 that Leo was finally released, and he returned to Austria as a broken man. He quietly resumed life as a chemistry teacher without giving interviews because he had seen too much. He married a woman named Edith, who was a fellow school teacher, and together they had one son named Peter Raubal. They lived in Linz, near where Adolf Hitler had spent his youth. His son Peter became an engineer, and like so many in this family, he never married and never had children. The 5 men who ended the bloodline. Today, only 5 men remain who carry Hitler's blood, and they are scattered across Austria and America. All of them have made the same choice. Peter Raubal lives in Linz, Austria, as the grandson of Angela Hitler and the last of the Raubal line. He never married and never had children and refuses all interviews. Heiner Hochegger was born in January 1945 and also lives in Austria. He too never married or had children. In Long Island, the 3 surviving Stuart Houston brothers live quiet lives. Alexander, Louis, and Brian are all in their 70s, and none of them had children. In 2018, Alexander gave a rare interview to the Times of Israel, and when asked about the pact to end the Hitler bloodline, he laughed and called it nonsense. But then he said something revealing when he explained they just did not want to pass that burden to anyone else. He told the story of one of his brothers who had fallen in love with a Jewish woman, and they got engaged. But when she found out who he really was, she ended the relationship immediately because the name Hitler still had the power to destroy love. Journalist David Gardner spent years tracking down these last relatives and believes they made an unspoken agreement that there would be no marriages, no children, and they would let it all end. This chapter of history is rarely discussed, yet its echoes are still unsettling today. What are your thoughts on this story and the choices that followed? Share them in the comments below. Paula Hitler. Of all Hitler's relatives, Paula's story might be the strangest because she was the only one who kept the family name until the very end, and she paid the price for it during the 1930s. While Adolf was rising to power, Paula kept her distance and worked as a secretary in Vienna while living quietly and trying to stay invisible. But even that was not enough to protect her. When her employer discovered who she really was, she was fired immediately because the Hitler name followed her like a shadow she could never escape. Adolf occasionally sent her money to help her survive. In 1939, Paula visited him at the Berghof, which was his mountain fortress in the Bavarian Alps. The visit was awkward and tense because Paula found the atmosphere deeply uncomfortable and full of arrogance, and people desperate to please her brother. She was an outsider in his world, who was tolerated but never truly welcome. When the war ended, everything fell apart for Paula. Allied forces found her hiding and arrested her on May 26, 1945. American intelligence agents were convinced she must know something about her brother's crimes, so they interrogated her for hours. But Paula denied everything and told them she only knew what the papers said. She claimed she had been living in the countryside and was completely isolated from everything that happened. No evidence was found to prove otherwise, so they let her go. But freedom meant nothing without dignity. Paula was penniless and jobless and forever marked by the name she carried. For years, she survived on meager state support and whatever remained of a small inheritance. She had nothing because no job would hire her and no community would accept her. The Hitler name had become a life sentence. In 1952, she moved back to the Berchtesgaden area and did something strange by adopting a fake name. She called herself Paula Wolf, and here is the creepy part. Wolf was Adolf's favorite pseudonym that he had used for years when he wanted to hide his identity, and whether Paula chose this name out of nostalgia or irony is something nobody knows. She found a tiny rental in a quiet corner of Bavaria where she lived alone and forgotten. There were rumors that former SS officers watched over her from a distance. In 1959, Paula gave one interview for a British television documentary, which was her only public appearance. When asked about the Holocaust, she claimed to know nothing about it. She did not condemn her brother and she did not mourn the victims. She just kept repeating what she had always said, which was that she knew nothing. 1 year later, on June 1, 1960, Paula died alone of a heart attack at the age of 64. There was no funeral worth mentioning, and no relatives came to mourn her. She was buried in a simple grave marked with her real name. But even that did not last. In 2005, her remains were dug up and reburied under an anonymous headstone, which meant the last Hitler was erased from death itself. While Paula kept her distance from Adolf, their half-sister took a very different path by becoming part of his inner circle, and that decision would cost her everything. Angela Hitler. Angela was Adolf's housekeeper during the 1920s and managed his apartment in Munich before later moving with him to the Berghof. For a time, she was one of the only women Adolf truly trusted because she controlled his meals, his staff, and his daily routine. But Angela had strong opinions, and when a young woman named Eva Braun started appearing in Adolf's life, Angela made her feelings clear. She despised Eva because to Angela, Eva was frivolous and inappropriate and unworthy of the man Angela still believed was a misunderstood genius. The tension grew worse every year until February 1936, when Angela made a bold move. Without Adolf's permission, she married her longtime partner, who was a professor named Martin Hamitsch. The wedding was held in Braunau am Inn, which was Adolf's birthplace. Adolf was furious, and from that moment on, he pretended Angela no longer existed. He never called her by her maiden name again, and in his letters and memoirs, she simply vanishes. But blood still meant something to him. When Allied bombing threatened Angela's life near the end of the war, Adolf ordered SS guards to evacuate her to safety and sent her over 100,000 Reichsmarks while arranging a monthly pension in his will. After the war, Angela disappeared and settled in Hanover, where she ran a small business and refused all interviews. She never condemned her brother, and in one of her last statements, she claimed that neither she nor Adolf knew anything about the Holocaust. On October 30th, 1949, Angela died of a stroke at age 66. Before we continue with the nephew who fought America's war, we need to talk about his father.